Well, this is a sad time for the United States, this new nation, a country barely 70 years old, and money and power was at the bottom of the trouble. Each part of the country wanted to control the other, the industrial north and the rural plantation south. So what did they do? They said, we're going to divide. The South wanted to go their way, and the North wouldn't let them. So we had the beginning of the Civil War. Well, folks, we've all heard about the Civil War. We've heard about how the country was split, and how one half wanted to go one direction, another wanted to go another direction. And it was something that affected the entire country. It wasn't just one county. It wasn't one state. The entire country was divided. And it was divided between Virginia on the east, all the way across to Arkansas on the west. You were either in the blue or the gray. Unfortunately, there were some people that lived in the blue states that actually went and fought for the South. And of course there were some from the South that went and fought from the North. It is unfortunate that this is where brother was fighting brother, father was fighting son, etc. This all started in 1861 at Fort Sumter. It ended in 1865 in April at Appomattox Courthouse. Within 2 to 3 months after that surrender, everybody had to go home. What we're going to be talking about this evening is one of those regiments, a regiment that was formed in the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois had 156 regiments. Now, a regiment consisted of about 1,000 men. You could imagine 156,000 men just from the state of Illinois actually signed up, volunteered, and were off to fight. Of that group, there's somewhere between 650 and 750,000 troops who never came home. But the Union was saved, and we continue to live the way we're living now because of the work and the sacrifice that they did. Now let's go on to our show and see what we can find for the 55th Illinois Regiment formed right here in Illinois. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a little bit of imagination, you can see where this is our country starting the Civil War. If you look up and down, you can see that there are certain states in here that had a lot of fighting going on. But when the volunteers were asked to come forward, the 55th Illinois Infantry Regiment was part of the Douglas Brigade. There were 2 regiments involved. We're going to just concentrate on the 55th. In 30 October 1861, there was 1,027 men mustered in at the new Camp Douglas in Chicago. From that point, these young farm boys had literally given up their lives to volunteer to save the Union. And they were a brave bunch. Now what's interesting is that when these young men volunteered, and in this case one of the companies in this regiment actually came from Grundy County, and when they came to Chicago as recruits, they were looked upon as these brave masculine farm boys. Wow, did the women love to see these men walking down the street. As it is, all they did here was get mustered in. They weren't given uniforms, they weren't given equipment, they were just being mustered in because they were going to go through training in St. Louis. So from here, they took the train, and we assumed that it was the Illinois Central. And if you can see on the map in front of you, these red lines will tell you all the different places that they went to during the war. Now we're going to go to each one of these places, and we're going to travel with them, we're going to fight with them, we're going to watch and see how these farm boys, who really had probably never been out of their own county, are going to travel all over the United States as far as the South was concerned. Well, folks, this is a chronological list of the travels and battles. Now, it might look like we have a whole bunch of stuff here. Well, it's going to go by quite quickly. But if you look at it, you'll see the black portion of it is the black writing. The red is the different skirmishes and battles and things like that. And we're going to start on the left, and we're going to go all the way to 4 years of travels and battles, all the way over to the right-hand side. And that will tell you what and where the 55th did during the war. Our first move, we have got to get from the Illinois River Valley and Morris up to Camp Douglas in Chicago. So it's just a little bit of a hop, skip, and a jump, but this is where they had to sign in and take their first steps to defending their country. All right, what we've done is we've taken their road map and we've lifted it off the map because we are starting from scratch here. Now you can envision they are going to be going from Chicago down to St. Louis to Camp Benton, Missouri. And what they did is they took the train down to Alton. In Alton, they got on a riverboat, crossed the river, and went into camp in St. Louis. And you'd never guess who their commanding officer was. Now you're going to see this throughout our little trip here. General Sherman. General Sherman and the 55th were almost locked at the hip, but they went through the war together. Well, what you see here, this is our road map. Now, if you went through the museum, the Grundy County Museum in Morris, you could read this and follow it all the way down through. What we're going to do is we're going to show you. We're going to follow this road map of the battles and the travels of the 55th Illinois through the Civil War. All right, now that they're working with General Sherman, they're going to be heading down towards Cairo, Illinois. They now have them in uniform. Unfortunately, they gave them some Austrian rifles that were terrible, but they're starting to look like soldiers yet. Now, they haven't yet seen the enemy. They haven't yet had to face him one-on-one. But as soon as they got down to Cairo, oh, and by the way, there was a general down there in Cairo that had been put in charge of the troops coming through there. I think you might remember his name was General Ulysses Grant. Okay, now there's our first look at a Johnny. He's got his weapon, he's got his uniform, and yes, he's got his black hat on. But at this stage of the game, the Confederate General Polk, immediately upon declaring war, brought the Confederates into Kentucky. And Kentucky said, we're neutral, we're not part of this war. But because Polk went there to Columbus, right on the Mississippi, the 55th was sent over there. In the process, General Grant said, well, shoot, if Polk's going into Columbus, we're going to go across to Paducah. So the 55th went to their first engagement, which was in Columbus, Kentucky. Here we are. Now, we get to Columbus, Kentucky, and guess what? The Confederates skedaddled. They got out of there before the 55th and the units that they were working with arrived. Of course, General Sherman said, we don't need this. There's no reason for us to be here. We're going to go back to Paducah. All right, now we're heading back to Paducah. Now, we're working by boat at this stage of the game. But these farm boys knew what weapons were good and were bad. Well, these Dresden rifles were so bad that somehow they all went overboard. And when they got back to Paducah, they had to get new weapons. But that's what they did. So right now, they're heading to Paducah, and hopefully they'll have enough weapons to be able to fight a war when it comes. Okay, now that we've been issued new weapons, the troops are heading down towards what they called the Shiloh Church, or the Shiloh Potential Battlefield. The troops are being exposed for the first time, or will be shortly, to a Confederate force, where Shiloh is going to go down in history, and the 55th is going to go down in history with them. They went down the Tennessee River, got off at Pittsburgh Landing, and at this stage, General Sherman was assigned the far western edge of the Union lines. Somehow, for some reason, the 55th was assigned the far eastern part of the line. So they are on the other side of the battlefield from their commanding officer. Well, they're starting to look like soldiers, they're starting to act like soldiers, and guess what? They're starting to find out what it's like to march as a soldier. Well, here's our battlefield. Well, we simplified it, but we put some colors in there to help you out. Now you can see where General Sherman is on the left. His entire division is way over there. On the right hand, our right hand side, but to the left of the Union line, the 55th. And they are it. Their regiment is on the far left of the Union line. And believe it or not, they have no artillery support there. And the Confederates still hadn't shown themselves. When they did and came out of the woods, they came out of the woods with a scream and started coming at them. Now it just so happens that the Confederate plan was to try to take the Union left, push it out of the way, take the river, and catch the Union forces in a pincer. And they couldn't get back to their supply line, they couldn't get back to the river, they couldn't get back to the gunboats. And yeah, the 55th was in the way.
This bloody flag has significance to the 55th. William Schallenberger carried this flag into battle on Shiloh Church of April 6th and 7th of 1862. This was the 55th Illinois' first major battle, and they defended the whole Union Army's extreme left flank by the Tennessee River without artillery support. They lost 86 killed or wounded, plus many captured. William Schallenberger was one of those captured. In order to keep the colors from falling into enemy hands, he hid the flag inside of his shirt, and some of his spilled blood remains on the flag to this very day.
Now you're probably wondering what this gentleman's doing there. Well, it turns out the 48th Ohio, which was on the 55th's left, actually were dressed like this during the war. There were quite a few units that were wearing this type of uniform, but it is unique, but also by the end of the war, everybody was into full gray or blue. These uniforms eventually went by the wayside. Okay, now the Battle of Shiloh was a tough one. The first day, the Union lines were caught off guard. The 55th got pushed back, but they did get pushed back under control. The one unit that was on their right, that was this 71st Ohio, they kind of took off and left the 55th Illinois and those Zouaves uniforms that you saw. And they held the line. And they just slowly but surely were pushed back and pushed back. But after the next day, General Buell showed up. Grant just said, don't worry about it. We'll beat him tomorrow. And that's exactly what happened. The Union lines got reinforced, and they attacked, and they pushed. And as they pushed, the Confederates broke. Now you got to remember, these are not troops from the Confederate side that had any sort of uniformity as far as weapons are concerned, as far as uniforms are concerned. It was a pretty ragtag bunch. And the first day of battle, they spent more time going through the Union tents and the campsites than they did fighting. And they lost that momentum. Well, as they started pushing the Confederates back towards Corinth, they ran across a Confederate hospital tent. And in the process, one of the Confederate generals came up on them, and they called it the Battle of Falling Timber. Well, it was a short, quick one, but General Forrest, who really became a thorn in the side of the Union through the rest of the war, actually ran so far ahead of his Confederate troops that he found himself completely surrounded by the Union troops. And what did he do? He reached down, pulled one of the young guys up on the back of his horse, and rode out back to his troops with this Union boy stuck on the back of his horse to try to use him as a shield. Well, Forrest did get wounded at this time, but it was a real short, quick shot. But in the process, we're heading towards Corinth. And in the process, Grant, who was not appreciated by the East Coast generals, was replaced. And this General Halleck came in and said, I'm going to take over here. Well, it took them approximately 2 days per stop. It actually took 30 days to travel 12 miles. I think he wanted everybody to walk backwards down to Corinth. But what they did is they dug trenches every night. And the next day, they kind of inched their way forward and then dug trenches again the next night. In the meantime, the Confederates had an opportunity to find out that they weren't going to be able to hold on to Corinth. But as the Union eventually got down there, and I'm sure President Lincoln back in Washington was saying, what on earth is going on there? Well, what happened on this is that this Halleck did so poorly, as what usually happens when somebody does poorly. They pulled him out after they got to Corinth, and he took Halleck all the way back to Washington and put Grant back in charge and said, run it, you make it work. Okay, well, here's one of our Confederates, and they're doing a retreat. They're leaving Corinth. They found out that they were pretty well surrounded. They didn't have the wherewithal. Their commanding general was killed in the Battle of Shiloh. And it was interesting in that they kept saying that he was the best general they had before the war started. And it turns out that where he was shot during the Battle of Shiloh was right in front of where the 55th was fighting. So it might have been one of their shots that ended this whole thing. He was shot in the leg, didn't pay attention to it. He bled to death, and it went through his boot, and he never stopped and says, oh, I'll get somebody else to fix it. Well, when he died up in Shiloh, General Beauregard, the general that said to fire the weapons at Fort Sumter to start the war, he retreated with the Confederates and left Corinth to the Yankees. Well, at this stage, the Confederates fooled the Yanks in that they kept cheering, saying, hey, like there's more troops coming. Well, actually, it was the complete reverse of that. The generals of the Confederacy said, hey, keep cheering like there are more troops coming. And actually what they were doing was cheering as the troops were leaving. So they're actually surrendering the city and getting out of town. Well, we had some skirmishes there, but when the Confederates left, the 55th was assigned to Memphis, Tennessee, which is right on the Mississippi River. And they were assigned there for a 4-month period of time, so they were not fighting any longer. What they were doing is basically regrouping, taking a deep breath, and getting ready for the Vicksburg campaign. They did not chase after the Confederates at this point. Well, we've taken Corinth, and right now the troops are being sent back to Memphis so that General Grant can start planning his Vicksburg campaign. So he started by trying to do it overland and sending supplies and troops through Mississippi. But the Confederate cavalry played so much havoc with them, he realized that that was going to be difficult. So he decided he was going to go down the Mississippi, and they were going to attack Vicksburg from the river, and they were going to attempt it through the Yazoo River and Chickasaw Bayou. Okay, well, here we have a riverboat. And what happened on this one, Chickasaw Bayou didn't work. General McClernand, who was a civilian, he was not a West Point graduate, he was trying to make some hay as a politician, so he was over General Sherman. So General Sherman and McClernand decided they were going to go up the White River to Arkansas Post and come out with a victory. And of course, Grant really didn't know what was going on here, which is unfortunate, but this is their method of transportation, was the riverboat. Now, today, we use these as a method of relaxation and quietly laying down and watching the river. In those days, it was full of troops. It had horses on it. It had cannons on it. It had everything on it. Well, okay, so they gave up on Chickasaw Bayou, and at this stage of the game, it was, let's try to make sure our backs are covered. So at this stage, General McClernand went up the White River, and he was going to make a big political splash, and he was going to take this fort that was on the White River in Arkansas. It was called Arkansas Post. Now, what we're showing you here is one of the armored riverboats. This had a very shallow, flat bottom to it. It was in Ironsides, and it was one of the main reasons why you can notice the big wheel in the back, right by the flag section. All they did was took a riverboat, completely coated it with iron. It became an ironclad. These became essential as far as controlling the river is concerned, because periodically a Confederate battery would see one of them passing by and would open fire on it. And the shells, because of the slant that was involved in the outer shell, just bounced